Today, we're talking about why tax season is so risky for your identity and your finances, and a few simple ways to protect your refund and your personal information. I'm Ian Bednowitz, and I am General Manager of LifeLock. With me is James Lee and Eva Velasquez. I'll let them both introduce themselves from the ITRC.
I'm James Lee. I am the president of the Identity Theft Resource Center, and my background is in data and cybersecurity.
Hi, I'm Eva Velasquez. I'm the CEO of the ITRC, and I've been in the fraud and consumer protection and identity space for more decades than I want to remember.
Well, thank you both for joining me in this very important discussion. And why is this so critical? We have seen a record number of data breaches, data compromises, a sharp rise in identity and financial risks. As you guys published in your report, there are over 3,300 compromises in 2025 alone, which is nearly an 80% increase in over 5 years. And in addition, 1 in 4, so that all of that information that's out there makes people more vulnerable. And we see that show up in tax season as 1 in 4 tax-paying Americans have already been victims of identity theft. And the losses are very material. The average losses are over $8,400 that are lost to tax identity theft, and they can be as high as $75,000, which obviously puts a pretty big dent in your tax season. Let me just start with a question on how have tax-related scams evolved in recent years? Eva, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think that the challenge with this is that the risk surface has increased exponentially. I think we've all done a great job of educating the public regarding traditional tax identity theft, where a thief files a tax return using your information and then gets that refund in their name deposited into their account. I do think people understand that piece of it, or a lot of people do, but there are so many other risks. And we're seeing a lot of impersonation type scams, links to providers, to platforms that really are not designed to help you file your taxes or get your tax questions answered. They're designed to capture more of your data. And also, we're seeing a pretty big increase in people's information being used for employment. So people are getting 1099s now for jobs and income that they never earned, jobs that they never had. And that is a form of tax identity misuse or identity theft. But I don't think the public is largely aware of those vulnerabilities and what to do when that happens.
Yeah, I don't think they are. It's something I've talked about before. Can you explain to our audience on exactly how that type of identity theft works?
I'll give an example, right? Our contact center, and we are getting these calls already starting this year, February, it's really going to explode. We had a victim call and say that she received a 1099 or the statement that says, hey, you earned wages or money from us from Uber. We saw this over the last couple of years. So a lot of the gig economy type of jobs, people are receiving these official notifications saying, hey, you made this much money working for Uber or for Lyft or for DoorDash and those types of things. And they really don't know. They don't understand. What does this mean? I didn't do this. And then we have to explain to them, your credentials were misused. Now you've got that earning on your record, and you have to resolve that. You have to go directly to the IRS. You have to go directly to the employer, the fictitious fake employer. And I think a thing that a lot of people forget is you also have to go to your state taxation department. So if you live in a state where you have to file taxes, which the majority of states are, you'll have to contact them as well. But that's what it looks like.
The person that perpetrates this, is it someone who just wants to avoid taxes, or is it that they're not eligible to work on their own, so they steal someone else's identity, or is there any other nefarious things going on when someone perpetrates this?
I mean, it's all of the above. It's hard for us to know what the motivation of the actual thief, and that's an identity thief. They're misusing someone else's data. But what is the motivation? It could be someone that the person knows. Maybe it's a family member or just someone in their circle who doesn't have the credentials to be able to work and get the job. Maybe it's someone who has a record, so they can't use their own name and they wouldn't pass a background test. Maybe it is someone who doesn't actually want to really have to pay taxes on that income. So that's another way. There's a whole host of reasons, but the bottom line is that person whose identity credentials are being misused, they're the one that is left needing to resolve that issue because it is going to fall squarely in their lap to do so.
And we saw a lot of these increases follow the same pattern that we've seen in data breaches. So a lot of the increase in these kind of impersonation crimes is because there's so much information available in these identity marketplaces. A lot of times we refer to them as the dark web, but not all of it's on the dark web. A lot of it's just on YouTube and open websites. But we saw that almost track perfectly the pandemic. So you mentioned at the beginning there, Ian, that we had 3,300 data breaches in 2025 alone, and we're up 79% in the last 5 years. Well, that's largely because we had a whole host of things which made it easier. Long before AI, we had other kind of technical things happen which made it easier for identity thieves to steal information in new ways at a scale they hadn't been able to before. And then it came at the same time as the pandemic. So now all of a sudden, here's this big pot of money. So I have these low cost, low skill tools that allow just about anybody with a smartphone to become an identity thief. At the same time, you've got all this money available. So you saw it with unemployment benefits, with housing benefits, with food benefits. Now you're seeing with these gig workers and other kind of employment where it is 1099 based. So it's not like they're going out necessarily and applying in your name for a job, although they may be doing that too. But they are actually getting these wages through these other means. And because you don't know about it, you won't find out about it until could be as long as a year later. And on average, it takes about 2 years to work through this kind of a problem with the IRS and the states when you get a fraudulent 1099. So it's a long time to work through these issues when they do happen. And because we're seeing more and more data breaches, we're going to see more and more of these kinds of crimes.
Of course, you guys help people when they do face these problems, as do we, because it is really hard to face these things on your own. I want to touch on something that, Eva, you said earlier about people are using tools this season that may not be intended for tax preparation. Our data shows that about 1 in 4 Americans plan to use AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Copilot for taxes, and that jumps even higher to roughly a third of Gen Z and millennials who are really trusting these tools. And when it comes to utilizing AI, where do you see the danger when it comes to identity theft and refund fraud?
All I see is danger in using those tools right now for tax preparation. And it's less so around the identity misuse and more so around just having problems that you're going to need to resolve later. Look, AI has a lot of benefits, and I'm sure at some point there will be some legitimate, useful tools, but right now, that is not the case. I really want to encourage anyone listening, please do not use your standard Gemini, ChatGPT to help you prepare your taxes, to understand the tax code. Please don't. It's not ready yet. It still hallucinates. It's just not a good idea. I want to encourage people to use the tools that are already vetted, and especially for folks who are saying, well, I just don't have the income to be able to pay a tax preparer, and they're using the platforms. Please use the legitimate platforms that we know have been vetted. The IRS has a list of free tax preparation tools that you can use for the free e-filing. I really want to encourage people to use that resource rather than just finding these things on their own on the web, because it is absolutely fraught with misinformation right now. So please don't. There's too many scams and it's too hard to tell what's legitimate and what isn't. Much better to go to the sources that we already know are vetted, and that's going to be on irs.gov.
Your perspective, James, what about Eva's talking about the accuracy. What about the safety of, I go to one of these tools and maybe I use, not one of the lesser known ones, but I use ChatGPT, OpenAI. Lots of people are using that. And I upload my W-2 and I have it, analyze my W-2 for me and tell me what it should cost and what services I should use. What are the risks of that?
Look at the bottom of your screen. When you get to the end of, after you've done your prompt and it comes back with the answer, what does it say down there at the bottom? It says you need to double check the information because it may not be accurate. And when you file inaccurate information with the IRS, you're doing it under penalty of perjury. You're doing it where there is both a civil and criminal penalty that could apply if the IRS so chooses. And your defense of, but I used AI to help me do my filing and to answer, what was my best option for deductions, et cetera. When you use technology for like that, when it has a disclaimer that says don't trust it, you're not going to be in a good position with the IRS when they come later and say, we calculated your tax liability at a much higher rate when you get an additional bill with penalties from the IRS. So are there legitimate uses of AI in this arena? Yeah, but you have to do exactly what Eva said. Then you got to double check with the legitimate sources who know the tax code, who work with it every year, and who are recognized by the IRS as being good sources of information. But even then, if you file something that's wrong, even when you got it from that legitimate source, always remember the IRS is not the most forgiving organization in the world. They'll work with you. They'll work with you on the penalties. But if you knowingly filed wrong information, it's not going to be a pleasant conversation because we're talking about tax enforcement.
Yes, and I completely hear that there's the risk that the AI can provide poor guidance. I think there's another risk that I'm wanting to get your perspective on. I upload my information, my W-2, which has all of a treasure trove of everything about me. Is it safe with ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these services if I'm using the free version? Or even if I'm using the paid version, what can happen by putting that information out there?
Yeah.
If I go file a completely accurate return with the IRS, what about my information exposure?
Yeah, we've already seen some of the mainstream platforms. They have been breached. So we know that there are vulnerabilities in their code that could lead to information being revealed that shouldn't be. So when you're filing, even when you're doing your basic due diligence, you upload, as you said, the W-2 and some other information. If you have not set your privacy setting in a way that information is not stored by the platform, then you're putting your information at risk. So that's your social security number, that's your income, that's your address, current address. This is all current information, and current information has high value to identity thieves. They can find a way to make money off of just about any kind of data, but current data is especially valuable to them. So you have to think very careful about uploading that information. And if you do you want it to be stored there forever, or do you want to hit that little button on that privacy setting that says it stays within your device and does not go into the chat so it trains the AI? All of the platforms today are still basically really, really advanced betas. They're not final products. Theoretically, they will never be final products because they will always be learning. But do you want them to learn on your personal information and put that at risk? I certainly wouldn't. And I don't think anybody should unless they are doing it knowingly and willingly. Assuming it's going to be protected, that's not a good approach.
For the non-technical people listening, I'm going to encourage you to just not do that. Anytime you are entering your personally identifiable information, your identity credentials online in any platform, you're increasing your risk surface. Anytime you do that. Now, how much you're increasing your risk surface depends on all the things that James was just talking about. The settings, what's the platform, what kind of cybersecurity do they have, all of those things. but that's an awful lot to analyze when you're trying to file your taxes. So I'm just going to say, average consumer, average tax filer, please don't share your PII with any of these AI tools. I don't think it's worth the risk. Only share it with the IRS, your tax preparer, or your previously vetted tax preparation software. I just think it gets too complicated for the non-geeks listening. That's a better rule of thumb.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of risk. Maybe you can tune the settings, but you've got risks of using AI and the accuracy in, making sure that it doesn't train on your data. And so, it sounds like the bottom line is at this stage, you don't want to use any of these general purpose AI pieces of software. I imagine more and more of, the legitimate software will be utilizing AI within them to help make it easier, but you don't want to just go to an open free site and put your W-2 up there. You're inviting a lot of potential problems down the road when you do that. The IRS now has specifically called out social media driven tax scams as part of its quote unquote dirty dozen list. And how do you see on social media whether something could be a tax scam or not?
Can I give you my sarcastic answer than my real answer? If it's on social media, it's probably a scam. I mean, again, I go back to the, previously vetted sources. And of course, there are some legitimate organizations that are going to give you tips and advice. We're on ITRC's on social media. You guys are on social media. The IRS has social media presence. So of course, those sources are going to be good, but I'm highly, highly, highly skeptical of individual influencers that have these videos and titles that are very clickbaity of here's the secret that no one wants you to know, and here's something that everybody qualifies for. And, any of those things that are telling you that you're going to get something special, that's secret. Look, that's just not true. That's just not how the tax code works. It's not how filing works. Yes, there are a lot of deductions. There's a lot of changes this year. It's very hard to keep up. That's all true. But I'm going to encourage people, please don't listen to a random influencer who's going to give you the behind the scenes secret trick of the trade, because that's just far too risky. And even if it's something innocuous where they're just trying to get clicks, it could be something really harmful, like a scam where all of a sudden you're in a rabbit hole and they're asking you to enter data and purchase something so that you can get more of this information. I mean, it really can unwind very quickly where you're suffering a financial loss and a data loss where you just thought you were going to get some important, helpful information, and you just go down that rabbit hole. So stay on the surface, go to the vetted sources.
IRS agents are some of the most, and the representatives on the phones and the call centers, they're some of the most impersonated government officials in scams. So the social media platforms are just another channel for that kind of scam to happen. As it's whenever somebody sees those magic letters IRS pop up on their smartphone or in an email or in a text, the little hairs on the back of your neck stand up. There's a little bit of ice runs through your veins because nobody wants to get that. And on the social media platforms, it's too easy for somebody to impersonate another individual. So it's once again, it's one of those situations where just don't do it. And if you must do it, vet very carefully who you're dealing with. We go back to the very beginning of the internet with the cartoon that's on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog. So
still true today.
Still true today.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it, James, it's worth repeating. The IRS is impersonated all of the time, and they will not communicate with you on social media, via text, via email, via call. They are old school and they will send you things in the mail. And so if it's not in the mail, it is not from the IRS, and you should not listen to it. Always go directly to the IRS website. Call numbers that are on the IRS website, nothing else, to be safe. Aside from that, what are a few things that people can do, simple things that people can do before they file to lower their risk of tax identity theft?
File first. I know that's been said over and over ad nauseum. File first, beat the crooks. But part of this is psychological. I think nobody likes to do this. We all want to put it off. And I've been talking about risk surface. Well, one of the ways that you can reduce that risk surface is by just cutting off the access. Once you have filed, someone else can't file and beat you to it. And the only pushback I've ever gotten from that advice is from people who are like, well, I can't file right away. I'm waiting for this document or this document, and that I can't file on the first day. And I understand that. I'm just saying, as soon as you can, have as much of the documentation together as you can early. Just, eat your vegetables. No, again, nobody likes it. Get it done early and just get it out of the way as soon as is possible for you and whatever your situation is. Also, the other thing that we encourage people to do is get an IP PIN. They're free. They're available to everyone. We were beating this drum when the IRS made these available to the public. I have not seen the uptake on this that I had hoped. And I think people either don't know that that's available to them, or they think, oh my gosh, it's one more hoop that I have to jump through. But I'm going to encourage people, please pursue it. It's really not that hard to get that identity protection PIN. And it's just another layer of security. So even if someone does have all of your identity data and credentials, so they would have the ability to file a tax return in your name, they can't do it without that PIN number. Yes, it's one more little layer of friction, one more hoop to jump through, but that is certainly worth the time, because unwinding this, remember what James said, it can take up to 2 years sometimes to resolve these issues. Unwinding this takes much, much longer than just using an IP PIN.
And I will tell you from personal experience, there was a delay in getting your IP PIN issued this year, but that delay is passed. So if you're listening right now, stop the tape, stop the stream, go get your IP PIN and come back, because it really is. It's one of the only things that can stop things from happening. There's a lot of things we can do to slow things and create friction for the bad guys, but the one surefire way to stop it when it comes to tax ID fraud is to have that IP PIN.
So we talked about a lot today. We talked about, the increasing complexity of tax identity theft, and that employment identity theft is becoming more common. So you need to look out for any forms from companies that you don't recognize, that you didn't work for. We talked a lot about using tools that aren't certified, AI, and how people want to use AI and the risks of using AI, both in terms of having hallucinations and filing an illegal return with the IRS, but then the other is putting your information, your sensitive information, into a tool, which even if you adjust the settings, you don't know what will happen to those tools. Breaches are very common, and so there's a lot of risk there. And then we finished by talking about the IRS won't contact you ever other than by mail. Don't trust anything from the IRS on social media or anyone claiming that, hey, I've got this one trick that the IRS doesn't want you to know. And then get your IP PIN is the other thing that we really highlighted. Are there any other things, if there's just one thing that both of you would say, and let's start with James on this, that you want our viewers to remember from this conversation, what would it be?
Get that IP PIN. Get it as fast as you can, because that will stop things from happening. But you have to do it every year. It's not a one and done. It's an every year kind of action. So mark your calendars for next year. Get your this year's, and then mark your calendar to renew next year.
Well, and I'm going to encourage people to ask for help. Ask for help from legitimate sources. Call the ITRC. I think there's a little bit of embarrassment or shame or just wanting to put things off and saying, well, I don't know how that works, so I'm going to guess. You don't have to guess. There is free help out there. There are resources, and you don't have to do this alone if you encounter not just a problem, not just an identity theft or misuse problem where you need recovery services, but for that prevention. Is this a good idea? So you don't have to remember everything that we said today. Just know where to go to get those questions answered. And, ITRC is here to help.
Absolutely. And like you said, LifeLock is also here to help. We provide a lot of services, monitoring services that will get ahead of any potential risk to your identity, including tax identity theft. If anything ever goes wrong, you would have the ability to have an expert with you every step of the way. But like Eva said, you can also contact those experts anytime. Well, I want to thank our audience for joining in on today's Q&A session with LifeLock and the Identity Theft Resource Center. And we will speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Happy to be here.
Thank you both, James and Eva. It's great to have you on.